All right, those are some great presentations, and we are so happy to have three people here in person to answer some questions and one person online. So in person, we'll have Jeff Ludwig, Tim Rafter, and Scott Berry, and online we'll have Caroline Mantell. So my first question that was posted in the chat, the Q&A for the session. Thanks for following directions, Cody Jones. Cody, if you don't know him, he's the boating law administrator from Texas, and he's an overachiever. So this question is a three-parter. All right. So what I'm going to read it all, but we may have to come back and make sure we get everything answered because I don't want to disappoint Cody. So here we go with that question. While the states may be a layered defense in this issue, the U.S. Coast Guard and Customs must be the front line in this and not make it a state issue. What is the Coast Guard doing to educate and work with Customs at points of entry to guard the gate? That's question one. Question two, why does the Coast Guard offer loopholes like bear holes that give foreign manufacturers ways to avoid requirements? And that third question is, why are the Coast Guard and U.S. Customs not the authorities for the issuance of HINs for all self-imported boats and not the state? And so for this, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Ludwig.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. So yeah, those are several questions from Cody, and I'll try to answer them. I might need your help to remind me what the second and third ones are. But first one, what is the Coast Guard doing with CBP, Customs and Border Patrol to try and prevent illegally imported boats? First, we've held several trainings with CBP to educate them on what the Coast Guard requirements are for recreational boats that have to be that are being imported in the United States. So we're just trying to make sure that they understand what a legal boat or a compliant boat looks like versus a non-compliant boat. The challenge is that there's no documentation that has to be submitted by an importer speaking, speaking to whether or not that boat is compliant. Customs and Border Patrol has to visually inspect the boat. And if anybody's seen any of our ports and seen the volume of shipping containers that come through, that's just an enormous task. And frankly, it's just not possible. So one idea that we have is trying to develop a concept called a declaration of conformity that requires an importer to provide some documentation and explains how their boat complies with Coast Guard requirements. So that would give some paperwork for CBP to review and make a decision on whether to allow that boat in the United States. So that's a concept. Unfortunately, it takes regulatory action to take that and make it happen. And so that's, not going to be happening in the near term, but it's something that we're looking at. One of the challenges we had with this presentation was I think CBP was affected by the recent DHS partial shutdown, and the people that we work with, were furloughed essentially, and were not able to prepare or participate in this event. So the next question, was that the bear holes, Stacy? Yeah. So the bear hole question, it's not an easy issue, but basically we do have an allowance for what we call bear holes for people to make manufacturers to make bear holes that are not regulated and do not require a HIN. And the reason why they're not regulated is because we don't have any regulations specific to a hull itself. The regulations really apply to the things that go into that hull to make it a boat. And if the manufacturer of a bare hull does not know what is going into that boat, they don't know how much it weighs, they don't know if it's going to need or how much flotation it will need, if it's less than 20 feet in length. And so if they don't know what's going into the boat, that bare hull manufacturer cannot certify that the completed boat is compliant with our regulations. So that's just an issue with the way the regulations are written today. Were we ever to revise our regulations, that's something that we could certainly look at. But it's a challenge with the way the regulations are today. And then the last question. Stacy?
Last question was, why are the Coast Guard and U.S. Customs not the authorities
Yeah.
for issuance of HINs for self-imported boats and not the state?
So thank you. Yeah, that's another regulatory issue. Basically, we've been advised by our attorneys that only issuing authorities can issue whole identification numbers. And the way our regulations are written today, the Coast Guard is not an issuing authority. The 56 states and territories are issuing authorities. So that's another thing that we're looking at for a regulatory update. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can change today, but hopefully we can change it soon.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? No? Good. All right. So just a reminder, someone had raised their hand. We are very good at technology, but not quite that good. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A portal there, so panel. And now my next question is for Caroline. Caroline, nice to see you. Great presentation. But the question for you is there a way to identify self-imported boats on the registration or title through a state-assigned HIN?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the registration or title, currently there is not a way to identify a self-import or an imported vessel. It's just not something that we include on the certificate of number. As far as the state assigned HIN, the NASBLA's VERT committee, the Vessel Identification Registration and Titling Committee, actually is working on a charge this year where it'll be a best practice where states should use the fourth character of a state assigned HIN. So the first three characters, which would typically indicate the mix. So let's say Florida, for example, would be FL followed by the number Z, or the letter Z. And then that fourth character would have significance as to why that state assigned HIN is being issued. So let's say for illegally imported boats, we would use the letter X or something along those lines. And so that way, when that boat travels from state to state or from owner to owner, there is an indicator of why the state assigned HIN was issued. Was it issued because it was missing a HIN, it was tampered with, it was a home built vessel, illegally imported, previously commercial, et cetera, things like that. So there is hope in the future that we can more easily identify a self-import or an imported vessel, and the reason that the state assigned HIN was assigned. Obviously, there's still going to be issues, like a lot of the speakers spoke about with the MIC code, the manufacturer identification code. If those importers are using MICs that are legitimate on their illegitimate boats, and the states aren't catching it. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we are taking steps to try and improve the process and make it safer. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. Now I have a question for my folks here, and I'm not sure which one of you, and we kind of had a little case study, which was nice, but I'd like to ask, and I'll let you guys choose. Can you help us better understand how illegally imported boats enter the U.S. market and where along that pathway safety compliance is most likely to break down?
When that happens, you just don't know if that boat is compliant. And then the Coast Guard most likely do not have a way of determining that either. One of the most important things with our regulations is that whole identification number. So that if we ever detect a problem with a boat, either through testing or accident investigation or something like that, then we can identify who the manufacturer is. We can identify the specific boat, when it was built, and then that provides some traceability on the product for all of those aspects to determine when the possible defect occurred and how it can be addressed, most likely through a recall. And we just don't have the ability to do that on illegally imported boats that do not have that manufacturer's identification code that's registered with the Coast Guard, and most likely a whole identification number with that. So besides that, we just don't know, if a boat's less than 20 feet in length, does it have, or does it meet our flotation requirements? Um, does it have proper ventilation? Is it wired properly? Just anything with regard to our regulations, we just don't know. Whereas a boat that's built in the United States or imported legally in the United States, the manufacturer is required to certify that it complies with our regulations, and that we have an inspection program that goes behind those manufacturer certifications and actually inspects and tests these boats to ensure that they do comply.
Thank you. My next question, I'm going to direct to by the way, anytime I ask the question, any of you on the panel can chime in. Don't let Jeff just hog the microphone, okay? But anyway, my next question, I'm actually going to direct to Scott and Clay, and Clay's online too. So what are the most important safety features or standards that may be missing on these vessels, and why do these gaps matter for real world boating risk?
So I'd say, is this on? Hear me okay? So I'd say really any of the standards, right? We don't know how these boats are built, what standards they're built to. They're shipped into the US. They could violate any one of the federal regulations or any one of the ABYC standards. Clay, do you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, I think you summed it up quite well with that. And would just reiterate certainly that.
Just to add to that, just an example, we just had an incident down in Florida where a small wreck boat was taken on water and it was completely swamped, and the people on board were able to stay on it because it kept floating. That's a standard that's required for these smaller vessels. So obviously that boat was built by an established manufacturer here in the United States. It's an NMMA member. It meets ABYC standards, and it did its job, right? It was built the proper way. It stayed afloat enough to where the people could stay on it until another boat was able to come by and pull them out. If this was an inferior boat that was built, somewhere else and sold in the US, and, that could have ended a lot differently. If the flotation wasn't there, the boat could have sank, and that day could have been a lot different for those folks. So that's just an example I wanted to give.
Terrific, thank you. Now, just to point out, because my friend Donna from Maryland, I don't know why she's not here, but she always had some good comments. And so you can also put a comment in the Q&A if you want. So Donna has said that we really should share this information with the boating public, and suggested an avenue. Thank you, Donna, for always looking out for, Donna's a true educator to make sure that we get the message out. All right. So I do have a couple more questions, and the next one I'm going to ask Caroline to answer. So this question says, when I purchased my car, I had a salvage title. This is a required state certified inspection to ensure it met standards before I could legally register it in a state. Could we do that with boats? If it doesn't have a proper HIN, then it goes through a state inspection, and can it be issued a HIN, but it will always have something on the title of the boat to direct future owners and enforcement of potential issues? And I'm going to start with Caroline because she does know a lot about titles, and then anyone else can chime in if they would like. Go ahead, Caroline.
Yes, another good question. We do have the Uniform Certificate of Title for Vessels Act, something that I absolutely adore, and a handful of states have adopted it, and that would tell you that the vessel was hull damaged, but that's the only provision currently in that Uniform Certificate of Title for Vessels Act. So there's not a way currently to indicate it. When it comes to inspections, that's another conversation that the VERC committee had at our meeting in March. And, we looked at the possibility. I know the Coast Guard is looking at the possibility, working with other organizations and marine surveyors to determine a way to truly inspect. But when you look at the numbers, there's about one boat for every 40 cars. So there's a lot more of a reason to have these inspection centers and people certified to inspect vehicles than there is, for cars. Plus, there's the requirement for inspections on vehicles and not on cars. So it's a little challenging. I know that the Coast Guard partners can surely kind of talk to this as well. We use the example of like a state that doesn't necessarily have as much water or a lower number of registered boats. Arkansas, I'm sorry to pick on you, but let's just say Arkansas. And so if something, happened in Arkansas, they imported a vessel and before that state assigned HIN was issued, what's the likelihood that there would be, someone who's been certified to inspect that vessel somewhere near where the person is trying to register or title it. So there's just some challenges logistically. It's not something that is off the table. It's something that's absolutely being considered. We're VERT and the Coast Guard have something in place for home-built vessels that require a certification from marine surveyors. And so prior to being able to sell a home-built vessel, it has to be certified to be compliant with the safety regulations. And that's something that they're looking at for imported boats as well. It's just a couple hurdles to get over before we get there. But I'll let anyone else add to it if they'd like.
Anyone else? No. Good. All right. Possibly the last question, but there's still some time to put your question in that that chat box, not chat, but it's question box. All right. My last question, I'm going to direct to Tim. How can federal, state, and industry partners work together to more effectively identify and reduce the presence of non-compliant vessels in the marketplace? Start with you and then anyone else. Certainly someone from NMMA might want to chime in.
Sure.
ahead.
Well, on the federal level, we have the regulations in place, and we kind of run the program. I guess the Coast Guard does, but also Customs and Border Protection. We've been working with them, as Jeff mentioned earlier, with training on what to look for when these boats are coming in. But honestly, the burden is mostly on the states, and we understand that. We have a dozen or so states that we hear from all the time because they're doing a really good job of scrutinizing these HINs and these boats when they're being titled and registered at the state level. But it's a big burden on them. As we heard earlier, there's a lot of training involved, and every state is a little bit different. Some states go through the DMV, other states go through their wildlife, Department of Wildlife. So every state does a little different, and every state scrutinizes the HINs a little differently. So that's the big place where we're going to catch these things is when somebody brings a boat, to get titled or registered at the state, and the state looks up the MIC and says, okay, this isn't right. This needs to be done or that needs to be done, or they direct them to us at the Coast Guard, and we work with them to get it figured out.
Yeah, so I'd just like to add, it's primarily an education issue, and two of the things that we've been working on in the Coast Guard is outreach. One of the big things is with Amazon. We've been trying to work with Amazon to educate them on what it is the requirements are for some of the products that they're selling, so maybe that their systems can flag these products that might be non-compliant before they even get listed for sale. And the other thing that we've started doing, and we hope to continue, is we attend an international conference every year for the last couple of years in Amsterdam for boat builders, and we try to educate them in cooperation with NMMA. Scott, right here next to me, they host what's called a USA Pavilion at a conference called METS, a Marine Exposition Trade Show in Amsterdam, every fall. And we're there as a resource for people that are interested in importing boats in the United States, and we help educate those foreign manufacturers on what it takes to legally sell a boat in the United States. So there's things that we're doing to try and educate, but sure, there's always opportunities to do more.
If I could just add, this is Clay with NMMA. And we continue, I mean, certainly supporting different efforts to, I think, just kind of reiterating what Jeff just mentioned on the education side, and whether it's bringing folks together or raising this in any different audiences that we have to shed more of a light on this issue, especially with different agencies, because I think oftentimes it's a need for improved coordination, communication, et cetera. Because as you said, like Coast Guard has these regulations on the book, and yesterday uh, I had the opportunity to testify before the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative on certain tariff investigations that they're currently doing. But I use it also as an opportunity to raise this issue of illegally imported boats and the need for more resources dedicated to this effort to help combat that. And I think that's oftentimes as well, some of the issue is with anything is always trying to direct additional resources to those that needed to enforce those on the book.
All right, thank you. And we have two similar questions, so I'm going to kind of try to combine these a little bit. From Pam, Dylan, and Jimmy Chang. I'm sorry, I'm having to read something far away. So it's kind of a combined question, and I'm not really sure. I think probably multiple people over there, I'm looking to my left, can answer this. But so first part of the question is, do you see any concerns with paddle craft being imported into the U.S.? And similarly, how do consumers know the foreign imported inflatable paddleboards, rowboats, or kayaks that do not need registration are compliant? Who wants to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question. So it's an interesting question. Paddleboards are determined to be vessels by the Coast Guard some time ago now if they're used outside of a swimming, surfing, or bathing area. But we also decided at that time that they did not have to have hull identification numbers. And so, there's broadly speaking, there's two types of paddleboards and inflatables, and then what we call hardboards, composite, fiberglass, whatever. And so the hardboards, they're not going to sink. And so there's really no issues with those. The inflatable ones, we have actually had a couple recalls with inflatable paddle boards because they had problems with their adhesives in both cases. But you can pretty much assume that any inflatable paddleboard that you buy is imported, most likely from China. And but the same issue, there's no regulations that apply to them. And the same thing really kind of goes for any kind of paddlecraft. Other than with the exception of the paddle boards where we accepted them, hull identification numbers, and that's just for the traceability in case something does come up, some sort of what we would call a substantial risk defect that's identified once the product is out in the field, because there's no applicable regulations to them. So that's where we stand with that.
Thank you so much. And maybe our last question from my friend Chad Talkowitz. I can never say that right, but he is asking, how can marine retailers help educate the boating public about the dangers associated with illegally imported vessels? And I'd like to ask Scott and Clay to answer that. Like I put him on the spot.
I'll
Yeah,
let
you got
Scott tackle that first.
Okay. So the question again, how can marine retailers help educate the boating public about the dangers associated with illegally imported boats? And I think it goes back to a common theme that we've been discussing throughout this entire presentation. It goes back to education. We've got to educate the dealers. We've got to educate the consumers, make them aware that this is an issue, that safety is a risk, and the industry as a whole is doing everything that we can to better protect them and reduce that risk.
Yeah, I would certainly second that. I mean, I think there is just a lot of opportunities that and I feel like, especially in the past couple of years, where we've just had different opportunities to raise the awareness of this issue. But I think it's also just the need for, collective, all kind of talking from the same sheet of music and having like, events like this where it is raising awareness across the industry, across the community, and just kind of helps deliver a great venue to raise awareness for this issue and be able to take those points and deliver them.
And I would add, that it's somewhat on the consumer as well to do their due diligence and understand what it is that they're buying. And if you're talking about a recreational boat, a consumer can take a look at the whole identification number. The first three characters is the manufacturer's identification code. You can look that manufacturer's identification code up on our website and identify who the manufacturer is, and whether or not they're a domestic manufacturer or if they're an importer of a product that's made overseas, and then just do their research from there.
I just wanted to add something as well. Kevin Madsen had mentioned, adding it to the curriculum of state required boater education courses. I like that idea. I think, especially as a lot of people that take those courses are new boaters. And so I think that's an excellent opportunity to kind of get the message out there. And then also, the Coast Guard does a lot of safety messaging. NSBC does safety messaging. There's monthly focuses that they focus on every month. And I think, if all of us as industry partners can get behind that message and make those shorts, or, if there is a standard short that someone can come up with and we can all share it as, the leaders in boating safety and boating education communication, just greater awareness, chances are hopefully they see it at some point and it sticks in the back of their mind when they go to buy a boat. So just greater sharing of it, along the industry as a whole.
Thank you. And Caroline mentioned that someone talked about the boating safety course. Someone else mentioned that when Coast Guard Auxiliary or the Power Squadron does their vessel safety checks, that's a good opportunity to do some education as well. So I love the out of the box thinking about how we can educate, and you're here today getting this message. Some of you maybe have never talked to your registration folks in your state. Talk to them and see what they, see what kind of challenges they have. But with that, I'd like to thank our panelists for being here in person and on camera for that lively discussion. Appreciate it. It worked really well. So thank you so much. All right. We're going to roll to the next session, and I'm going to give a little intro, and then you may have a little bit of a break, but not too much, but a little bit of a break. So our next session will start at 10:55. Okay, it's 10:50 right now, 10:40 right now, but I'm going to do the intro first. Okay, and because that's how this rolls. So we're going to shift our focus in the next session from the boats themselves to the equipment and the gear that boaters depend on in critical moments. In today's online marketplace, it's easier than ever for counterfeit or mislabeled safety equipment to make its way into the hands of the consumer. As you listen to the next session, think about, would you or your boaters be able to tell the difference between a legitimate and counterfeit life jacket? What happens when the safety equipment looks compliant but fails when you need it the most? And how do we educate both the consumers and enforcement officers to spot the warning signs? This is a rapidly evolving issue with real safety consequences. So as we've been talking about this whole time, the next session we will start at 10:55. So you're going to be going out to the lobby in just a few minutes. You'll have a little bit of time for a bathroom break or a bio break, and come back so that you can click onto the session at 10:55. I'm looking to my person to make sure that's correct. Yes, he's giving me the thumbs up, 10:55. And at that point, we will welcome Will Hilliard and his panel to join us to talk about counterfeit equipment. Thank you so much. Enjoy your little break, short break.